Our closer tonight is none other than Anthony Wood. Preservationist, historian, and grant maker, Wood is currently the executive director of the Ittleson Foundation. If that name rings an air of familiarity, it's because the Ittleson Foundation provided the grant for Orpheus and Apollo in honor of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Ittleson Jr. Anthony has worked for the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, the J.M. Kaplan Fund, and the Municipal Art Society. A member of numerous preservation boards across the city, state, and nation, he is also the author of Preserving New York, Winning the Right to Protect the City's Landmarks. Please welcome Tony Wood.
Thank you, Sean. Well, first, I want to applaud Landmark West and the Preservation League for leading the challenge to have this incredible treasure reinstalled where it belongs. It's a reminder why we have active, powerful preservation organizations, and I'm proud to have served on both of their boards at some moment in the distant past. But this is the reason we need groups like that to prevent New York from making hideous, irreplaceable errors, which is what we're looking at here if this piece isn't reinstalled. So I come to this from two perspectives. That as representing the foundation that made it possible to bring this Lippold masterpiece to that location for the benefit of the people of New York City. And I come to it as a preservationist. And I have to say, both of those perspectives lead to the same obvious conclusion, which is that this work really has to be reinstalled. Otherwise, you're destroying it. And that certainly was not the intent of the donor. In the wonderful New Yorker piece that's been referred to so many times tonight, and I urge you all to read it, and maybe Landmark West has it on its site or we'll put it up. It tells the story of Abramovich going to Henry Ittleson and telling him about this incredible need he had, wanting Lippold to do this work. And Mr. Ittleson wasn't familiar with Lippold and went up to see the Lippold at the Met and came back saying, absolutely, we'll fund it, and it has to be Lippold. So there's no doubt this was a site-specific piece of art designed to be in a prominent location and meant to be a permanent installation. All you have to do is look at it to realize that the donor's intent was that this was not a passing installation. This was an integral, permanent part of that building. The fact that it now seems to be inconvenient to keep it there does not pass muster. As a preservationist, how many times have we heard somebody come forward and saying, oh, the program requires that this be done. There's no way we can continue unless this is done. And time and again, we found that wasn't indeed the case. So it's, I think, very important for a lot of reasons. Philanthropically, you know, donors expect their gift to be respected and treated with the intent of the donor. So let's not undermine the competence of further philanthropists who might want to bring certain other wonderful works to the benefit. But the philanthropic is a cultural institution. Lincoln Center is a cultural institution. With that come many benefits and many responsibilities. Deaccessioning, or in this case, really just jettisoning an incredible piece of one's collection is not something that should be done lightly and really deserves public scrutiny. It would truly be an act of civic vandalism to remove this piece. And Ada Louise Huxtable was quoted earlier, and I want to read what she wrote about Penn Station just briefly, where she goes, "We will probably be judged not by the monuments we build, but by those we have destroyed." And I think Lincoln Center needs to think about that. Do they want to be remembered as the creation of Geffen Hall at the destruction of what I think is recognized and will continue to be recognized as this incredible piece of art? Are we really going to have that type of vandalism happen in 2020 in New York City? We've come so far beyond that. So I think there are many people willing to step forward to help figure out how to reinstall this, put it back where it belongs, and it will continue to add value. There's a recent story in the New York Times about an abbey in Germany that just commissioned wonderful contemporary stained glass to attract people there, to make it a magnet. And that's what art does. And this sculpture, integral into this building, is an asset for Lincoln Center and the Philharmonic. It should not be thrown away. So I think we've probably all covered a lot of territory tonight. Sean, I think we probably have an audience chomping at the bit to to put in a few questions and probably opinions. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to you.
Thank you so much, Tony. And Tony's correct. Once again, at this time, if anybody does have any comments or questions for our panel, we have Maren, Miani, Phyllis, Caroline, Tony, and we also have Joseph, of course. Please feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you and call on you in turn. The first question is from someone named Howard Newman. Howard, if you can hear us, I'm asking you to unmute.
There we go. Oops, unable to start video because the host has stopped it. Can you start my video?
Just go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. I and my crew restored the Lippold that is called Trinity at the Portsmouth Abbey here in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. We had the object was made of 22,000 feet of gold-plated wire, and we had a chance to get our hands on every linear inch of that object. And I will tell you, somebody said, well, maybe he was a genius. Let me tell you, he was beyond that. His subtlety, there was only one drawing we had. It was a really bad reproduction. He had figured out all the lengths of the individual pieces of wire in English measurement by 1/128ths of an inch. He had, 37 1/128ths of an inch marked in places here and there. I have to say that the object that we restored was all earlier than Orpheus and Apollo, and it was linear. It was basically a series of truncated triangles, and we were able to disassemble the whole thing in a very organized way. What I'm looking at with Orpheus and Apollo, I mean, if I thought he was a genius when he made this, and the music thing, he was somewhere between jazz and Bach. I mean, it was unbelievable subtleties in between all these pieces. What he did from there on to Orpheus and Apollo is, I mean, I'm pretty good with metals, but that's really beyond me, I'll tell you. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Phyllis, you had your hand raised. Did you have something to say? Nope. Okay. Our next hand raised is from Jean Golden. Jean, can you unmute?
You can hear me now?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to thank you all for this magnificent presentation. I go to Lincoln, Center all the time. Of course, now I can't, but and I didn't fully appreciate the beauty of the sculptures until this program, and I appreciate that. I have a tangential question though, and I hope you don't mind. And Phyllis Lambert, when she was talking, you could see the top of her hair, and it's beautiful. And I want to know where she gets her hair done, because it is gorgeous. That's another work of art.
Well.
Any secrets to divulge, Phyllis?
I cut it myself. I cut it and washed it myself since I was 25. That was a long time ago.
I think some of us are doing that with the COVID now.
Thank you very much.
That's a great comment.
I see a familiar name. I'm going to call next on Kai Lippold.
Hey, this is Kai Lippold. So I'm Richard Lippold's grandson, and just wanted to say it's really cool to see this, all the excitement about his work. I didn't know Richard that well. I was only 14 when he passed away, but it's been really interesting as an adult to kind of go around the country and see his pieces in their different locations and kind of how they really add to the space and in a wide variety of forms all over the place. So just wanted to say thank you for holding this. It's really neat to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Next is Adrian Untermeyer.
Hi, Sean. Thank you so much. I am just awash in amazing information. And Phyllis, it is a true privilege for all of us to be in the same virtual room as you, as well as our other panelists. So those of us who care about items of this vintage, shall we say, have a hard time convincing the public as to why they matter. I was just hoping the panelists might all be able to weigh in with either a word or a phrase, as those of us who give a damn are trying to convince others to give a damn.
Good question. Who wants to take the bait?
I think actually there's a generational thing going on, and I think there's a generation, and I think, Adrian, you're part of it, that is really embracing that period in time. And I think that's where we're going to look for energy, is to come from that generation of preservationists, to join with some of us old war horses who see the appreciation of this. But I think the energy and the drive and the ability to use social media to reach out, I think we've got so many tools to use to engage a larger public in appreciating this. And programs like tonight, I think, are terrific in really helping people understand that that's just not a mass of hanging metal up there. I mean, it is so much, much more.
I think you're right in the younger generation regards this as a discovery, whereas people of our generation have lived with it for a long time, and so it's not new news. So I think this kind of architecture, this kind of piece is particularly vulnerable at about the age of 50 or 60, because it's kind of old news to the older generation, but the newer generation rediscovers it. In terms of a catchphrase, I would submit, was it Wordsworth who talked about separating the dancer from the dance? And I think that the dancer in this case is a sculpture, the dance is the whole building. You can't separate them.
I was just thinking that it's extremely important as you watch the waves of art go by over the decades to understand that different generations want different things, appreciate art in different ways, experience it in different ways. And I recently was reading some sort of ArtNet news thing that interviewed millennials about what they wanted from their experience of museums when they go back after COVID is over. And to my appalling or appalled sense, they said, we want entertainment and fun. And I thought, well, okay, whatever, moving right along. But I think you can't take away something that's part of a history because of these things that do constantly change.
I would also just kind of add in here that I think this is part of a larger conversation around an appreciation and understanding for art's functionality. And this is something that I think within the contemporary sphere is maybe more accepted than it was even in the post-war period, when that was again thought of as something that was detrimental, right? That art should be autonomous. And I think, you know, the fascinating kind of commission that happened and wasn't realized with Rothko and the Four Seasons is a perfect example of this, that, you know, art should be something separate from life. And I think the more that we can educate and get people excited about seeing art in public spaces or semi-public spaces, and to see it not just, again, as something plopped down in a lobby or just purchased as a tax write-off, but something, again, that is very thoughtfully kind of integrated and helps to enrich and shape and actually move people through spaces. That's also something that I think should be a part of this conversation.
Frank Sanchez has had his hand up for a while, so I'm going to ask Frank to unmute.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Carolyn, you were going to say something?
No, I just said hi. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I thought this was really a terrific evening. But I have a question really for Sean. I think there's so many people on this webinar who are interested in doing something about this. It might be helpful if you could explain very briefly the exact situation here. My understanding is that this is a landmark, that it is not a landmark?
It does unfortunately not. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission refuses to hear it. We regularly submit requests for evaluations, but the State Office of Historic Preservation has identified it as National Register eligible. So it does have some protections under the law, but ultimately, there's a 9-page signed document from Lincoln Center asking them not to futz with the campus. And this was signed in 2006, but they removed this 8 years after it was signed. And
So since the commission is afraid to designate it, the Lincoln Center is therefore not responsible to anybody?
one would think they're responsible to their public.
Well, true, but legally, they're not responsible to anybody?
Legally, they could tear it down tomorrow.
Well, I would just say there may be some questions there about who they're legally responsible to. I will just leave it at that.
Fair enough. It's also an interesting time, right? This is an urban renewal site that displaced San Juan Hill, and it's a timely conversation to be having this. Who was displaced, what replaced it, and who that belongs to. There's streets and sidewalks New York City gave up.
Well, the purpose of my question, Sean, is just so that everybody that's listening knows sort of the best way to direct their comments and who to comment to. Is it writing to Lincoln Center? I mean, how do you approach this other than strictly in the public realm, just by having articles and public commentary about the ridiculousness of the idea?
Yes, we need an action plan. This is a first step, but we need an action plan.
Part of it is just awareness. I've been speaking to some people who vaguely remember this, even though they lived down the block. So part of this as a first step, Phyllis, please unmute yourself.
Phyllis got a comment.
Is to remind people what this is, teach them the importance, make Lippold a household name. And you're welcome to sign letters to Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center is a multi-headed hydra of different subcontinents between Juilliard, the Walter Reed, the Film Center, the Vivian Beaumont, etc. So we can get you those names. Everyone can access Landmark West at landmarkwest.org, and we can be the conduit for that. And we're going to continue to maintain our page, landmarkwest.org/NYPhil, PHIL, which I'll show you in a moment. But please, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the really important things that came out tonight, and I think it was Maren who brought it up, and that is the period itself, the sculpture in New York of that period. It was a period that questioned a lot of things, but it's really something that ought to be landmarked as a totality, because it is just such an amazing, I even thought that the architecture of the period, sort of imitating Nice in a way, on Park Avenue, was important as a kind of a statement of what was happening there. But the sculpture is much nicer than those imitations of the people. And so I think that's very important. And also, I think another point you made was the fact that these ethereal, walking through dynamic space things are so different to sculpture from before, because Lippold himself said that the proportions and the materiality of the work itself was related to, and scale and space to the same elements of the building itself. Then he actually said, as it was in Chartres Cathedral. And of course, you see just that is so different from his work. And yet it was something, of course, is so marvelous. I think those were two very important points. But the first one, I think that one ought to make the saving of getting this back into place a much bigger thing than just one object. I think it's a very important object. But I think that's the incredible richness of that work and that time. And there are other works too.
John, I would just also jump in to Frank's specific question. There are a lot of very responsible, thoughtful people on the boards involved, with the Philharmonic and Lincoln Center, and I think they need to be reached out to by people who know them and respect them and help educate them. We know sometimes boards sometimes are the last to know, right? When staff and projects get generated, etc. So I think it's early enough. The work hasn't started. I believe, and others can correct me, I think the architects actually had a plan that allowed for the hall to be renovated with the Lippold still in place. So I imagine there's still time for these institutions to rethink this, and hopefully we all can educate them and support them in doing the right thing. So I think it's one of those things where, yes, we need editorials, we need op-eds, but I think we need a lot of outreach and education, and hopefully we can convince the powers that be that that's the right thing to do, and it's the right thing to do for Lincoln Center as well as the city. But it would impoverish Lincoln Center and the Philharmonic for that to not be there.
Thank you.
You know, too, there are other examples of works of art that have actually gone back, having had been removed. I remember the Joseph Albers mural in the Pan Am building was removed, was gone for years, and now, you know, it's back again. I wonder if there isn't an example or a group of examples that could be brought up to the Lincoln Center board of other major places where art has been, site-specific art has been removed and then has gone back in place.
Well,
I would say the Bertoya on 510 Fifth Avenue would be a
That's right, the
example of that.
Absolutely right. That's back, Manny Henny.
No, and Frank, that's just a perfect example because the stewards of the MetLife Pan Am building right now have recently just cleaned and restored Flight, the Lippold piece to Juan Tripp.
Which stayed there. That space actually has its integrity, I think. They never fooled with that space. Everything is still there.
Thank you. There's one, I misunderstood before. I thought, Phyllis, you had a second hand up, but there's a different Phyllis on the Zoom. So I'm going to ask Phyllis's iPad to unmute for the last question.
Oh, okay. Am I unmuted?
You're speaking.
Oh, good. Okay. So what about donor intent? And is there a way to reach out to major current donors of Lincoln Center? For example, perhaps even David Geffen, and get them to pressure Lincoln Center?
I know the Postal Service is having a lot of issues right now. If they can get to his yacht, that would be amazing.
But Phyllis, I think that's an excellent idea. I mean, I think in a situation like this, you have to use every possible entry point to get this message in front of the people who can make the right decision. And funders have an ability to do that, perhaps more than they should at times, but this would be a very good time for funders to pick up the phone and say, hey, look, this just isn't the right thing to be doing. And it will take wonderful leadership for the Philharmonic and Lincoln Center to decide, let's put it back. We've heard, we think it's the right thing to do. And then, ask the rest of New York to be supportive of that.
And part of that leadership would be for Lincoln Center to put a committee together of experts to decide how to put it back. We had somebody call in just now. I mean, somebody come in at questions. Howard Newman, who is an expert restorer and knows Lippold's work very well and has restored the church at the school at the Abbey.
And we still have Marilyn Karp, who was there at the creation.
Right. And there's someone waving their hand, so I already lied to everybody saying it was a last question, but E-Lip, would you unmute?
Yes, hi, I'm Arrow Lippold. I'm Richard's son. And thank you all for your time and efforts and your love of our father's work. I know my sisters are part of this meeting too, as well as my son, who you heard from. I have a very practical question, which is, does anybody know where the working drawings for reinstalling the sculpture might be? Nobody in the family knows. The foundation doesn't exist anymore. And I personally have no knowledge of what has happened with Richard's working drawings or models or any of that stuff. And it seems to me that that sculpture is so complex that without proper documentation when they took it down, even that would be sketchy. But that's my general question is, does anybody here know whether there's any information about that.
I'm going to let Maren field this, but first I will chime in. If you can believe what you read in the news, the New York Times did say that this was three-dimensionally scanned and that
Okay.
each piece was individually wrapped before it was crated and shipped to Jersey.
Then there's a hope in Hades.
Yeah, if they're correct about the actual scanning happening, I think between that and the models and the documentation that is, you know, widely available, I think it could be done. But it's a really excellent question, and it's a shame because there are examples of other commissions. So the Four Seasons, for example, those preparatory drawings are in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art.
Right.
So it's very easy to see how how those goes. But I actually do not know of any existent. I mean, they would have been made, but I have no knowledge of where those exist, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even the models.
The larger
Exactly.
question is how to find the archive and in some way give it a public value, public presence.
Yeah.
Well, that's a mystery. Yeah, there should be a catalog resume project. Be very difficult, but
I think someone could also,
an energetic, interested person to take on. And as you told me, Miani, earlier, they might have to hire an FBI agent or some kind of person for a while to track pieces of the archive down that were displayed.
And his papers are at the Archives of American Art, so that's at least a large portion. But
well, also I think if Gene Lippman and Howard Lippman owned the model, they gave a lot of the work that they owned to the Whitney, but I know the Whitney only kept, I think, maybe a third of the pieces, and then the others were sold, and it could probably be traced as to where that piece ended up.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Did you ever ask Lincoln Center representatives if they had any drawings?
Maybe the Lincoln Center Library has something.
Sean, I think we should try and open the mic for Janet Parks, who was waving a hand and may have some good information.
If everyone will indulge me for one more speaker, one last comment, Janet, if you would. I've asked you to unmute.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I have so many. I'm glad Maren brought up the Smithsonian. There's also quite a bit of material on Lincoln Center in the Max Abramovitz archive at Avery, which God knows when we'll be able to go access that. But there are a couple other points I just really wanted to make. Is that I think part of the problem is that that's one of the least loved buildings. That there's been so many changes to that building from the very beginning, and the original auditorium had lighting that hung down that was like more in keeping with the Lippold structure outside. So they kind of worked together. The pared down sort of modernism of the Johnson just sort of almost sort of flattens the value of the Lippold as well. And that piece of sculpture always was like potential music, because it could make noise itself. And that was always one of the great poetic aspects of that sculpture. And that, talking about the wiring and Max's connection to that kind of thing, at the same time, he's doing the General Assembly building at the University of Illinois, and that has got a concrete, it's a concrete structure, but then he wrapped the building over 2,600 times for reinforcement to hold the building together. The whole interior of that is a mass of intersecting wires. So there's a real aesthetic interest, I think, in his work with what Lippold was doing as well. So I agree with everything everybody was saying. This is such a travesty that they took this down with no intention of putting it back. So I applaud you all for a great session, and thank you for seeing my hand wave, because I don't have that function on my version of it.
It's good
Thank you, Janet. So we are long, but we accomplished a lot tonight, and I appreciate everybody's attention and dedication to this. I want to thank you, our audience, for your interest, but also specifically our participants, Joseph Giovannini, Miani Johnson, Marilyn Karp, Phyllis Lambert, Maren R. Sullivan, Anthony Wood, and my co-host Caroline Zaleski, but also the 7 to Save program of the Preservation League of New York State, and our staff who have their fingerprints secretly all over this with logistics, Andra and Sarah. The discussion's not over when the Zoom ends. If you have questions, please email us at landmarkwest@landmarkwest.org. I will pose them to our panel and we will post them to our website. And you can follow this and the recording at landmarkwest.org/New York Phil. Thank you and good evening.